Hello, my name's Janet Dowling, and I'm going to tell you a story. It was up in the mountains, and there was an old man who lived up there, and he lived with his 3 dogs. Now, he was a kind of man that was a recluse. He wanted to keep away from other people. He would sometimes come down from the mountain into the town, and maybe he would buy some food, or maybe he would offer to work for somebody in turn for food. He had 3 dogs, and those 3 dogs were always around him. And they were called Toby, Taby, and Tooby. Well, he could be seen in the summer walking across the bridge, and his dogs would come scampering after him. They went everywhere that he went. But when it was winter, well, he would stockpile food up into his cabin. But when it snowed bad, and it was very difficult to get back down into town. And so there was just him and his 3 dogs, Toby, Taby, and Tooby. And he would go out in the snow and try to find something just to supplement his rations. And sometimes he'd catch a squirrel that hadn't hibernated, but there really wasn't much around. And it did get to a point where there were several days when he and his dogs didn't eat anything at all. And then one evening, as he's in his cabin and he hadn't eaten for 2 days, there was nothing left. He could hear a snuffling noise outside the cabin, and the dogs all sat up and looked. And so he went out and he opened the door and he listened again, and he could hear a snuffling noise, a scratching noise. And he called his dogs, go, go. And Toby and Taby and Tooby, they went running out, trying to find, sniffing, but the noise disappeared. And this went on the next day as well, even during the light. There was a snuffling and then a scratching. And Toby and Taby and Tooby all went out, but they couldn't see anything. So he was trying to get a bit less desperate now. And so he pulled out his hunting knife and he went out and he stood outside the cabin and waited and waited and waited. And sure enough, there was a snuffling sound. There was a scratching sound. And so he stood still in the shadows. And as soon as something came round the corner, he leapt forward and with his knife just brought it down. And whatever it was just ran away, but all he had was a tail. But you know, there was a good lot of flesh on that tail. Come on, Toby, Taby, Tooby. And he took that tail and he scraped it and scraped it and scraped it. And there was enough flesh. And he was able to cook it up into a kind of broth. And so there was enough for him and enough to give the 3 dogs. And they lapped it up because they hadn't had anything for 3 days. And when he ate it, it wasn't the best, but it was food, it was protein. It was something that would keep him going another few days, just hoping that the snow would disappear. But that night, as he got back down onto his bed and under the covers and the dogs were sleeping around him, he could hear a scratching again around the side of the cabin. And he turned over thinking, I'll get it tomorrow. But then he heard, who's got my TailyPo? Who's got my TailyPo? What? And he sat up in his bed. And he was a bit scared. He can't surely have taken the tail from a creature that could speak. but then the sound had gone. So he stroked his dogs and lay down to go to sleep again. But within seconds, there was that scratching and snuffling sound. And again he could hear, "Who's got my TailyPo? Who's got my TailyPo?" At that point, he got up and he walked across the cabin and he flung open the door and he said, "I don't know who you are, but leave here now." And there was no more sound. And he closed the door and he went back to bed. Snuffling, a snuffling. "Who's got my TailyPo? Where is my TailyPo?" And our man got up out of bed and went to open the door again and called out, "If you don't leave me now, I'll set my dogs on you, and you know what they can do." And he sent the 3 dogs out after, and the dogs went out, Taby, Toby, and Tooby. And they were barking, and they were running, and then there was, and the dogs did not come back. And our man closed the door. He locked it. He wedged something against it. And he went back and sat into the corner of the room with his knife in one hand and a blanket over him on the other, waiting for the sun to come up. And all through the night, he could hear snuffling and snuffling and snarling and scratching all around the outside of the cabin. And, "Who's got my TailyPo? Who's got my TailyPo?" And he sat there and he wondered what kind of monster this was. And then the noise, the scratching, the snuffling, the snarling was inside the cabin. He couldn't see anything but shadows, but it was definitely inside. He pulled the blanket around him and he got the knife out, ready to take on anyone that should come his way. "Who's got my TailyPo? Who's got my TailyPo? Who are you? Where are you? Show yourself!" And suddenly, in the shade of the moonlight, he could see a huge shape, a dark shape. Was it man? Was it monster? He did not know. All he could hear was, "And who's got my TailyPo?" And out came a finger, a long finger, and it pointed down at him, and it said, "You've got my TailyPo, and I want it now!" Well, those snows did not go for several weeks. And when he didn't come down to the town, they did notice, and they did go up to the cabin just to check on him, see if he was okay. But they couldn't find any sign of him or the dogs. But do you know, even now, people say they can hear on the wind, "Who's got my TailyPo? Who's got my TailyPo?"